Alright, welcome back to the channel of Winks. Today we talk about Druid cards, which I did say we were going to next time, so here we are! Da 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 da. Druid, I was kind of looking, I didn't look through them too much ahead of time. But I have on the side now the the decks from the current meta. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of get it together this time. So let's jump straight into it. We have Guess the Weight. 2-cost spell. You draw a card, guess if your next, and then you guess if your next card costs more or less. If you get that correct, you draw that next card. So for 2, you can draw 2, which I think is pretty darn good. Especially for when you're trying to keep a lot of cards in your hand. It's very difficult for some certain decks to do this. And also, of course, depending on what you draw on that first card. Like, for example, if you draw a 1-cost card for your first card, it's going to be very easy. I have no clue what it's going to do if it's the exact same cost. I don't know if it puts it back or if it does draw it. I'm honestly not sure. That's going to have to be an interaction that will have to be explored. So obviously this works for, well, not obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. I should say this card works for, like, maybe it will work for Guardian Druid, maybe not. Kind of just think that Druid doesn't have any tier 2 decks, to be honest. So that is kind of sad. But, it's not a bad card. Especially if you get it right. Otherwise, it's 2-cost, draw 1, which is not great, but honestly not horrible. So for that, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Type of deck, probably Guardian Druid, maybe. I don't know how the card draw is for that deck. They might need more stuff, but it could maybe go in there. Lunar Eclipse, 2-cost. Deal 3 damage to a minion. Your next spell this turn costs 2 less. So, it's obviously a small spell, making other stuff cheaper. I think it works pretty well for what it needs to do. I think it's especially good for Gibberling Druid, because they care about just doing a lot of spells, and when your stuff is cheaper, you can do more spellcasting stuff. But it doesn't necessarily do buff, but it still could work because it makes stuff cheaper. So it might not be a terrible option for it. Not going to be probably great. Honestly, probably Solar Eclipse will be better for it, which we will get to in a second. But this card isn't bad. Not great for really any of the other current Druids, and I don't think there's any support too much for much of it. But it's not a bad card. I'm going to give it 6 out of 10. Most likely you may see it in Gibberling Druid, but probably not. Solar Eclipse, on the other hand, your next spell this turn casts twice for 2. Very much should go to Gibberling Druid. If it's not in Gibberling Druid, I will be disappointed, because what you can do is you can play Solar Eclipse, and then you can do like Savage Roar, and then you Savage Roar twice for the price of 1. Well, actually, just for a little bit cheaper. It does make me think, it's like, is this actually worth it to go in to the Gibberling Druid deck? Because the Gibberling Druid deck has a lot of cheap stuff. And honestly, I do still think it is worth it to do that. because everything's cheap, you're easily able to pay for that extra 2 to cast the spell again. Because you don't necessarily have both Savage Roars in your hand, but you might have a Solar Eclipse and a Savage Roar, which will then give you the win. So I think this very much works for that. I will give this a 7 out of 10. You'll probably see it in Gibberling Druid. Not much else. Cenarian Ward. 8 cost spell. You gain 8 armor. You summon a random 8 cost minion. It's not terribly exciting. Kind of works well with Solar Eclipse if you wanted to, but you're probably just going to play this how it is, because it's not horrible. It's not great, but it's not horrible. It works for Big Druid, kind of. Because I think Big Druid is more big minions, but you do get a random 8 cost minion out of this, and you get some armor to hopefully protect yourself a bit more. So I think Cenarian Ward does fit into the Big Druid category, and it could very much work in there. The card itself is fine, I guess. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. And you'll probably just see it in, like, Big Druid. Probably not much else. Faire Arborist. 3 cost 2/2. Choose one. You either draw a card or you summon a 2/2 Treant. If you corrupt it, you do both. See, at first, because it's a choose one card, you instantly think, oh, maybe this should go into Quest Druid. But if you corrupt it, you do both anyway. So it really doesn't do much. But then you don't have to worry about corrupting it, so it's kind of weird on if you want to actually put it in there or not. It doesn't really fit into too many decks right now, because like a Treant Token Druid sadly isn't a thing right now. Drawing the card isn't bad though otherwise, if you need the card draw really badly, or you can summon a 2/2, which is 3 cost 4/4. If you do both, you get a lot more out of it. It just sadly doesn't really fit in any Druid right now, but it's not a bad card. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10, because it's still good. Type of deck you would see this in. I don't think Token Druid's coming back. There's not enough for it. It just sadly doesn't really fit into anything. Really, the only option would maybe be like Quest Druid would maybe use this. Fizzy Elemental, 9 cost 10/10 Elemental with Rush and Taunt. Another great card for the Big Druid. Maybe it's getting some good momentum with these new cards. I don't know. We're going to see. It's just honestly pretty darn good. 9 cost 10/10 is already good, because the 10 cost 10/10 we've seen before, and that wasn't good. Plus, even though it's a 9 cost 10/10, you'd be like, oh, that's fine-ish. It's got Rush and Taunt, so it makes up for it. Just being big. And it has an immediate presence with the Rush, and then it has immediate presence on the next turn with the Taunt. It has immediate presence really quickly. So honestly, it could be very good for Big Druid. I am going to give it a 8 out of 10, because I think it's quite good. With just, yeah, the stats are good, and then the Russian Taunt is very useful. It's like, oh, what if it was just a 9 cost 10/10? 9 cost 10/10 is fine, but it's not great. The Russian Taunt really pushes it over that edge. It makes it actually a pretty darn worthy card. So, and then of course it's going to be a Big Druid. Ombre Owl, 7 cost 4/4 with Rush, costs 1 less for each spell you've cast this game. You would want to say, hey, this works well for Guardian Druid. Really doesn't. It's too expensive, even though it's really small. And you honestly don't play too many spells in Guardian Druid, if I remember correctly. It's a lot of beasts and stuff like that. I don't think there's too many spells. I don't think this really sadly fits anywhere. It has to be a very heavy spell deck. And then even with that, if you get it down to free, it's still only a 4-cost rush rut. A 4/4 rush, which sadly doesn't do much at that point in the game anyway, because it's so late. Yes, it's free, but it's honestly not good. It's sad for me to say, but it's not that good. I'm going to go with a 4 out of 10. And type of decks, you honestly probably won't see any play. I'll be honest. Unless you... Honestly, it might be just experimented with in, like, maybe some type of spell druid, but that's maybe about it, sadly. But you might see it around. Probably not that much. Moon-Touched Amulet. 3 cost, give your hero +4 attack this turn. If you corrupt it, you also gain 6 armor. I think this card is fine. Doesn't probably necessarily fit anywhere, but it's a decent card. I like the card. Yes, I see other people's videos of reviews and stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, it's just a slightly cheaper bite, with you having to have to corrupt it first, which, I mean, I get that, but it's still not bad. Because it's still better. It's still technically better. Like, oh no, you have to play something that's a little more expensive than it to get that 6 armor. It's like, you're probably not playing it right on turn 3 anyway. To be completely honest. It's sadly, I don't think it fits in anything in this current meta right now. And I don't think there's really anything new that it looks like coming out of Druid. So I will still give it, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Type of decks, you may not see this around unless there's some Druid deck that I'm not seeing that could very much just explode out of nowhere. Which I would be very much excited for, because right now, Druid's highest is a tier 3, which is almost tier 2, but it's just below 50%, so makes me sad. Grey Bog, 5 cost, 4/6 legendary with taunt. Death Rattle, give a random friendly minion Death Rattle, summon Grey Bog. It's not bad. I like it. Probably doesn't really fit too much of anywhere. It would fit into like a token druid, for example, because you always have stuff on the board, so you're always giving the Death Rattle to something. Silence is the easiest way to deal with this. It's just a weird card. It just doesn't fit into anything. Druid has so many of these cards where it just doesn't fit anything to right now in the current meta, and I can't see any support for anything new, sadly. So it's just strange. It's just in this strange place of, like, they're giving you many ideas of stuff that Druid could do, but there's just not enough for it. For example, this is another one. It's like, yeah, you always have to constantly have something on the board, or literally any silence will finish this off completely. So I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10 because it's still not bad. It just doesn't fit anywhere. So type of decks is, I got nothing. I don't think it's really gonna fit into any type of deck, sadly. Kiri, Chosen of Elune. 4 cost 2/2. You add Battlecry. You add a Solar Eclipse and a Lunar Eclipse to your hand, which we went over those earlier. I don't know if there's any type of deck that really necessarily needs this. Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse is fine on their own, but like it's fine. Maybe you could throw it into the Quest Druid. For sure not. For sure, Gibberling maybe would use it, but it would also be the most expensive card in the Gibberling Druid. Which tells you how freaking cheap it is. Like an Arcane Explosion counters the whole deck, basically, at that point. You have played your Gibberling. Arcane Explosion. It's over. It's done. Game finished. I don't mind the card. I think it's fine, but I just don't necessarily see where it can possibly go right now. So I am going to give it... I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Type of deck... Really probably only Quest Druid, and that's about it. And that might not even work either. So you may not even see him around. You might see some experimentation with him, but that's probably about it. Next time, I will talk about the Demon Hunter cards. See you then.